So let's talk about the very good news, what the FCC did after almost a 6-year process. And what they did is they listened to opportunity and they encouraged innovation, and it has a direct application to smart cities and in particular to critical infrastructure and in particular the electric utility industry. What the FCC did is they said, okay, we're going to change 35-year-old rules and we're going to permit very precious spectrum, which is in a sort of an excellent combination of propagation and penetration. It's a nationwide spectrum position. We're going to let that spectrum be made available for new broadband services. And the kind of services that are anticipated are those that can be provided through LTE, which is the first ever global wireless technology. And every one of us I know, whether geek or cool, has at least one device in their pocket or their purse, which runs on LTE. Now, this spectrum has been made available so that private industrial use of LTE can be deployed. And what the position that Anterix fills in this is we're very much hoping to help drive innovation in the industry. We have a very large spectrum position in this band that we acquired back 6 years ago. But we're a player, but not the only player in this space, attempting to find a perfect way to marry up LTE broadband technology and the demands of the modernizing grid. So let's talk about a few things that can be done with the right deployment of LTE broadband technology for critical infrastructure, and applies directly to smart cities and the topics today. This technology, when deployed in a private infrastructure, can be insulated from the internet. It can be far more cyber secure than anything that relies on interconnection through the internet. It has the capacity, it has the capability to support numerous use cases that make the grid operate more efficiently and with more resiliency. And the example I like to use is that, as everybody on this panel knows, what's happening to the grid is that it's being driven by distributed generation, such as wind and solar, under the impetus to use less carbon fuel. And as that happens, as the distributed generation becomes an integral part of the modernizing electric grid, two-way communications is essential in a way that it's never been required before. So let me stop by saying a very exciting opportunity, and Anterix is thrilled to be a player in this space. We've gotten to know many of the movers and shakers in the electric utility industry, and we're working with them, trying to bring all the benefits of modern technology, of broadband technology, into solving critical problems that are facing the electric industry in grid modernization. I had the opportunity to participate on a panel yesterday for NARC, the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, and spoke about some of these use cases. And in particular, I focused on the last mile in connectivity for getting control of and having a situational awareness of what's happening during every part of the grid. And this is these are the sensors that can be deployed throughout the grid, way beyond the reach of fiber and into the hard to reach places where wireless is the perfect way of collecting data and analyzing it and then having situational awareness. So there are numerous use cases for monitoring and controlling critical elements of grid operation through a far-flung area. So that's That's one category of use. Another category of use is for wildfires. We think this is such a vivid illustration. There's a technology called falling line conductor, and it takes roughly 1.4 seconds for a wire that's been struck, say, by a branch in a windstorm. It takes roughly 1.4 seconds for that live wire to hit the ground. And if there's dry brush there, that live wire can and often does start a wildfire. The technology, the LTE technology, because it has amazing capabilities of speed, which is referred to as latency, that technology can measure, detect the fault, send a notice back to headquarters, and get them notice back to deactivate that line within the 1.4 seconds, because LTE technology operates in milliseconds. This is way beyond the capability of existing wireless technologies, and it's just one of the great benefits that the FCC has now made available for private LTE uses. And there are numerous others. There's dozens of use cases that have developed from typically not mobility, which most of us think of when we think wireless, but fixed wireless uses. But let's look at it this way. There's a convergence now of technology which is driven by the insatiable appetite of consumers around the world has driven volumes into the billions of the chipsets that operate on LTE. And as a result of those billions of chipsets, the cost has driven down. And so it is now economically practical to do things with these chips and devices and control elements that would never have been possible before. So it's a convergence of that, the regulatory environment, any number of other things. It's tragic to think of what could have been, but it's for our purposes, we're trying now to move forward, learn everything we can about what's going on in grid modernization, because there's many different things going on in grid modernization, to see to the extent to which broadband wireless can become a important foundational element of the new grid.
I think the importance of this discussion is the utility industry really does not yet fully understand the potential here. I think they've begun to understand it. The Edison Electric Institute's done a very superb job of communicating this opportunity.
Our vision is the industry becomes familiar with and gets comfortable with, gets its regulators comfortable with the kinds of investment that need to be made. And then the network of networks begins to take over and produce all sorts of benefits.
We're the largest state-owned utility in the country, and we have about 6,500 megawatts of generation, and also own about a third of the high voltage transmission systems, about 1,400 miles of transmission. We've got a clean fleet of assets. 83% of our generation is renewable, and we really, as you can see from the maps, serve as the sort of the backbone of the transmission system, both east, west, and north, south. And we own most of the interties to PJM in Western New York, and to Ontario Power Gen, Hydro-Quebec, and the New England Power System. Our customers are primarily governmental customers, state agencies, cities, towns, villages. We have munis and co-ops as well. And we do serve a small slice of the private sector in connection with some economic development customers that we have that are primarily required by our statutory mandate, and also sometimes as a result of our hydropower licenses. And for those customers, we also do about $250 million to $300 million of energy efficiency projects for those customers. So one program that we rolled out in the smart city space was commenced in 2018, and it's called Smart Street Lighting New York, which was launched by the governor with a goal of converting 500,000 streetlights to LED by 2025, and he directed the New York Power Authority to lead that effort. So as most of the folks know on this panel and in this audience, increasingly street lighting systems are no longer used solely to illuminate roadways, but are now considered vertical assets that can be used for a variety of new and innovative functions. And through the Smart Street Lighting New York program, NYPA assists municipalities around the state to convert the lights to LED, and then offers the option of adding smart city platforms for the deployment of additional technologies along with those LED lights. We offer a full turnkey service, including financing, the purchasing of the poles by the municipality from the local utility, and then we'll install, and then we'll help them maintain the lights. And they can add on, as many bells and whistles as they want. They can maybe start just with lights, or they can start with a small subset of the technologies that we can deploy, or some communities adopt the full smart city package. So far we've got about 350,000 lights in development, design, or construction around the state. So we're already at about 65% of our 2025 goal. And as I said, these fixtures create a smart city platform that results in improved municipal services and a better quality of life for the residents of these communities. And another feature of the program is we launched a $7.5 million grant program that enables these municipalities to essentially buy down the cost of the smart city add-on technologies. And so we've helped some communities add to the package that they've purchased from us. And one great example is Syracuse, New York, where we provided a grant of $500,000 toward the purchase of 17,500 lights and poles. And they used that money to upgrade to the smart city platform. And the mayor there was quoted as saying that he wanted to be a leader in this area, and he hoped that by deploying these technologies and being forward thinking that he might be able to attract more residents and businesses to his city. So just very quickly, a few things that these technologies add to the smart city environment. You have asset management capabilities, and by that I mean full controllability of all the lines. You get performance notifications. You have dimming features. On the public safety side, you can have video streaming, license plate reading, noise monitoring, gunshot detection. And then on the connectivity side, you hope that maybe these smart city technologies reduce the digital divide in some neighborhoods, and also potentially enable public Wi-Fi and maybe the future deployment of other IoT devices and 5G. On the environmental side, air quality, ice and snow detection, weather reporting, flood warning, thermal mapping, and waste management advice and notices. So all in all, very exciting. I think program in a small way that we can play in the smart city space, given our limited customer base and the uniqueness of our assets. So next, I'd like to just spend a couple minutes talking about, and we could go to the next slide, please. Spend a couple minutes talking about our digital journey. As many of you know, a couple years ago, our CEO planted a flag and said that we want to become the first end-to-end digital utility. And so most of us around the organization asked, what does that mean? And so we worked on developing a definition internally, and you can imagine, just like vision statements and other things that we worked on in this space. It took quite a while for everybody to agree on a single definition. So the definition is that NYPA will become an end-to-end digital utility leveraging connectivity, big data, and analytics to drive actionable business insight that enables us to better serve our customers, employees, and other key stakeholders. So as part of this effort, there are really three main pillars to it. One is our Integrated Smart Operations Center, or ISOC, and you'll see that depicted on the slide. And this basically is a data collection effort where we deploy sensors throughout the state. We transmit information through our communications backbone, some of what Morgan was talking about, secure way for us to transmit data from all the sensors we've deployed. And then the ISO 55000 is just a certification that we've met a certain standard. Very popular in Europe, not so much in North America, but we were the first North American utility to receive an ISO 55001 certification. So basically, this is the asset performance piece of it through the ISOC, and what you get is basically across the bottom: outage avoidance, improved reliability, and long-term planning, enablement. So the next pillar of the digital strategy is what we call the Agile, or our Advanced Grid Innovation Lab for Energy. And there, again, touching on something Morgan said there, we're really looking to use big data analytics to simulate and integrate the next generation electric grid so that we can plug in, let's say, a new wind farm or a new solar farm, or model out a big injection of offshore wind into the grid, perhaps on Long Island, and see what that does to the system. And we make that available to other utilities and people in the private sector that want to utilize that database. And the third pillar is what we call the New York Energy Manager, or NIAM, which is another data collection exercise for our government buildings that we have. Since we have so many governmental customers with considerable amount of buildings, as you can imagine, a state university of New York with close to 60 campuses around the state and all the buildings that they have. And so what we've done is we've done deep submetering and created a database through deployment of sensors throughout 18,000 governmental buildings around the state. And what we do is we feed that into the ISOC here and help customers monitor their energy use. We can also help them spot emerging repair issues and so forth. So the idea behind this is essentially you're creating digital twins of your assets and inserting them into the ISOC, and then the system knows what healthy looks like, and then you feed in real-time data from either the transmission system or power plants or substations or transmission lines, and we know what healthy looks like. So if we see any abnormalities, we can address them. And just in the first year, we saved over $5 million in fewer outages and spotting maintenance before it became an issue. So right now we have 55,000 sensors deployed throughout our system, and our plan currently is to go to 115,000 sensors around the state, and gather that data, send it back to our ISOC, which is located in our main office in White Plains, and be able to, like I said, monitor that data inflow and help us better preserve our assets and better serve our customers and our stakeholders.
The question that we're asked by city leaders all the time is how we, as Johnson Controls, can help them with their recovery and their reoccupancy and their phased reopening of their buildings, their places and their spaces. And not just theories at this point. Thought leadership must include providing actionable information, which has evolved in the last several months. And while the world is united in this shared experience, it really significantly varies globally between regions and states and local municipalities. Our leaders, especially leaders that we've been working with, have asked, how do we reopen our buildings? How do we keep them safe and secure? How do they reduce their costs and be more efficient? And then how to really bring back flexibility and resiliency. One thing they certainly have learned is how to be adaptive, and they know their infrastructure needs to be as well. So cities and counties and municipal entities are really looking for those right partners and advisors, such as yourselves, at this critical time of recovery. And communities really need to create flexible and safe building environments that will guide their citizens and constituents and business owners into that new safe new world. We're not really using new normal, new world return, right, as the phase reopening of all these local economies that have been greatly impacted during the pandemic. citizen cooperation and leadership alignment throughout the world is also very key. And we're seeing that unravel in the news, and specifically with some of our customers. Just getting that citizen cooperation is vital. So directly in line with that cooperation is really that citizen confidence that we've all been discussing, and really the ability to have a nearly touchless experience when they enter buildings, have the technology to ensure the safe distancing, contact tracing, air purification, and disinfecting technologies, and creating those flexible infrastructure in places and spaces that can bring those people out of their shelters and have them thrive again. So cities really need partners. They're asking for partners that can help them create and fund that sustainable infrastructure. They know that in the past, they were not investing in technologies that allowed for them to seamlessly connect with their people and their staff in their buildings. And now we're really kind of reaping, I guess, the consequences. So I've been fortunate to be with Johnson Controls. We've been on the forefront of building, as Clint mentioned, some really vital patient monitoring environments, converting spaces such as old cotton mills, parking lots, convention centers into hospitals, and helping municipal buildings such as city halls and police and fire complexes being more adaptive, so they can easily be put to work in natural disasters and future health crises. So we have mentioned that while our future is uncertain, one thing is really clear, that local government and community leaders are embracing more innovation, and they're really determined to make their cities and their community environments more secure, connected, and resilient. And prior to COVID and this pandemic, we spoke about clear, connected, and resilient communities, and that message remains. The collective experience that this pandemic has brought and assisting cities across the globe to get back to really thriving. So that's what we've been hearing is, and we put together basically a checklist. We were hearing in the air, on surfaces, and I guess surfaces, air, and out the door, what that means to be touchless, what that means for individuals to feel safer, to get back into those buildings. And so from remote monitoring, from using, as Justin mentioned, lighting technologies and the vertical assets to help with contact tracing, air purification, social distancing and spacing, remote access, helping flow of individuals and heat mapping of patients, as well as citizens and business owners. It's been very interesting that we're trying to create these nearly touchless environments, because their citizens are saying they won't come into their buildings, they won't come back out to their restaurants. Even if there's phased reopenings, they need that confidence in knowing that they're safe and that their city leaders and their and the leaders in the building community and business community have their safety in mind. So we've been working with a lot of the technologies that we've had in the past. We've been partnering with some extraordinary companies, such as the New York Power Authority is one of our good partners, to put together these touchless, frictionless, safe, resilient environments. And it's been intense and really rewarding. Decarbonization, absolutely. So when we look at that, and I will say from an innovative, I'll just say a pandemic innovative building, I'll use that example. We're assisting a city out on the West Coast in building a navigation center or a homeless center, very different than what they've had before. It was converted from an old factory to make it safe and to ensure that the folks that they're trying to keep in a safer spot are coming into a safer space. They're allowed to bring partners, they're allowed to bring their pets, which is not normally the case. And they needed to stand that up in a month. And so working with their local contractors and their engineers, working with all the different parts of city government, which, as we know, is continues to be siloed, to try to pull this all together to help them from an efficiency standpoint, from a safety standpoint, and then an overall resiliency, because this is going to be a permanent structure that they were rebuilding, putting isolation wards in this space to make sure that if folks did become positive, that there would be a safe place for them to be. Every single experience, I think Clint has, is the positive and negative, is that they're unique. And we're being asked to do things that it's not perhaps scalable in the future, but right now they're so customized depending on what the previous infrastructure was, but we always have an eye on how can we make it more efficient, how can we make it more resilient. We certainly have our eye laser focused on decarbonization and ensuring that whatever that we are standing up now will meet the standards for the future. And we have groups within our organization, like, our government relations and sustainability councils, that they make sure that everything that we do has that element included in it.
We know that cities are on average 9 degrees hotter in the summer. And we know that low-income neighborhoods are 15 degrees hotter in the summer. And that has huge health and energy consumption and climate impact consequences. The way that cities have made selections around how they surface their cities has been on an agency by agency basis. So when you talk to a Department of Transportation and you say, hey, what about making that dark road more reflective or porous? They'll say, well, why would you do that? And you say, well, because you want to reduce city temperature and smog, and you want less flooding, and that's a big deal in a climate change world. And they say, well, that's not our responsibility or expertise. So the creation of the coalition was to take a step back and say to cities, you should think about all your surfaces together. This is how you manage sun and rain. And the way we do it today is lowest first cost, dark, impervious surfaces that cause enormous amount of heat and flooding. And cities where most of us live, as a result, are, again, 9 degrees hotter, 15 if you're in low-income neighborhoods. The coalition is made up of 40 organizations, including the National League of Cities, the largest city group, the American Public Health Association, the American Institute of Architects, the American Planning Association. So organizations that are very influential at the city level. And we're thrilled and absolutely delighted and very grateful that Clint and his partner Simon Steele are serving as pro bono counsel to smart surfaces in our work in the US and internationally. Over the last decade of research, we found that cities that adopt smart surfaces across the city typically achieve benefits that are between 3 and 5 times as large as the cost. And those benefits accrue in areas like large reductions in AC peak load, improved air quality, reduced health costs, increased employment, reduced risk of credit rating downgrade from a Moody's or Standard & Poor. And so the purpose of this coalition, this relatively new not-for-profit, is initially in the US, India, and Southern Europe to work with and enable cities to shift from what they do today, which is to make surface decisions at the level of an agency on a lowest first cost basis, and instead to take a step back and say, hey, let's do what's most cost effective. Let's think about all of these surfaces in totality. And in doing so, we can change the trajectory of temperature in our city. So adopting smart surfaces can deliver about 2 degrees Fahrenheit peak reduction in the summer every decade for the next 3 decades, and can deliver about a 10 to 15% greenhouse gas reduction equivalent. So it's both climate change mitigation and a lot of climate change adaptation, which is the temperature reduction. As I noted, the benefits disproportionately accrue in low-income areas, which are minority areas. And then we actually have a study coming out with the American Public Health Association documenting the benefits in terms of pandemic risk reduction from smart surfaces. So it's a new coalition, ambitious agenda, reshaping how cities think about and quantify their surfaces. We built a cost benefit analytic engine we worked with about 25 cities on already. And so that's what we're trying to do, reshape city surfaces in order to improve quality of life, cut costs, slow climate change, and continue to have cities livable. Imagine, my last point here is, imagine as a mayor saying, we are adopting strategies that will reduce the city temperature 2 degrees every decade. So the world is getting hotter, the country's getting hotter, your city, your homes are getting cooler. That's a good story. I think the biggest challenge is inertia. So if you talk to a Department of Transportation or the department that deals with water, they say, well, we've done this for 100 years. Why should we do it differently? And by the way, when I go and communicate what we're doing to the CFO or the mayor, I'm not getting any feedback saying that my budget's changing or my priorities are changing. So what has to happen is the city has to step back and say, wait a minute, for the first time, let's think about our entire surfaces, which are around 2/3 hard surfaces, and adopt surfaces through strategies that for cities can cost no money. So code, flexibility on FAR, flexibility on accelerated permitting are tools that cities have that at no cost to them that can provide a compelling incentive for the private sector to reframe their surfaces and make the cities much more reflective, much more porous, use more solar, use more green. If you adopt high albedo, porous, green, and PV, you could actually reduce warming because you're bouncing much more light and heat back into space. You're increasing power generation. We have an MOU with NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, to look at quantifying the additional benefits of putting PV on green roofs and high albedo roofs. So what we have not done is understood the full benefits at all. That's part of the coalition's purpose. We've put a big price tag on making anything different from dark impervious surfaces.
Really, I thought that listening to Morgan and Justin and Lisa and Greg brings to the fore the potential of technology to improve municipal services and municipal outcomes. And that indeed was the plan in the Quayside project. Now, technology, for example, let's take the greening technology that Greg described, does not necessarily rest upon personal information. So the issues of permeability of the soil or addressing heat islands does not engage any personal information and therefore does not engage privacy rights. But as Justin mentioned in relation to utilities, and Justin, you gave the example of smart streetlights, many digital innovations do rest upon use of personal information. And that is precisely where, as you mentioned, Clint, the Quayside project became so contentious. And the main lesson to draw is the fact that addressing privacy issues is key to obtaining social license to implement the digital innovations that a smart city will rely upon. And so what I did, Clint, is that I went through all of the privacy comments, analyses that have been put forward in relation to smart city innovations. And I decided to draw the 4 main ones, the ones that come most prominently. So most prominent, and we saw it in spades in the Quayside project, is the fear of surveillance. And so going back, for example, Justin gave us a really interesting description of the potential of smart streetlights. But at this moment, San Diego is dealing with a very controversial issue whereby there are media reports that the police used the footage of the smart streetlights to conduct criminal investigations on protesters, including the defunding the police protests. So the fear of surveillance is a very, very important privacy risk to address. And there are solutions, but right now I would just like to bring out all the risks. A second risk, a fear that comes out a lot, is fear of surveillance by the private sector agents who are hired, who are engaged, who provide technology to the smart city. And one example of that is what happened in London with the smart bins. So 2012, London Olympics, London decides to install smart garbage bins that had the capacity to push notifications on every cell phone in their vicinity to alert them of a security threat. So it was a security purpose. Fast forward to 2013, and we discover that the company who had provided the smart bins was now pushing ads to the cell phones in the vicinity of the smart bins. Complete departure from the initial purpose and no consent. So that's an example of how privacy risks are well-founded. A third that really comes up a lot is the fear of data breach. And that, in fact, from my literature review, I have seen that cybersecurity experts are also concerned about cyber attacks against municipalities. It's not just citizens. Cybersecurity experts invoke the fact that, sadly, municipalities do not always have the proper funding to protect the data at the level that they should. On top of that, cities are hot targets because the data they have is so useful in terms of ID theft. Plus, because it's critical data, ransomware, which essentially paralyzes your database, is, of course, of a great promise, let's say, to ransomware attackers. So those are the really four main issues that came out in the controversy, as you say, Clint, around Quayside, and that appear in every smart city project that I have studied as trying to put the Quayside project in perspective. So overall, the advice or the lesson I've learned in these pretty intense years we've just gone through with Quayside. So the first piece of advice is understand that without privacy protection, you do not have social license and you will run into issues. You gave the example of New Orleans. I gave the example of San Diego, but we can take those examples over Europe as well. So that's the first overall advice, is address privacy, as Justice mentioned, as integral to the rolling out, the integration of digital innovations in a smart city.
Some of you may not know, Joint Base San Antonio is the largest military joint base in the United States here in San Antonio. It comprises 12 different sites here in and around Bexar County. We have the privilege of being the 7th largest city, and we serve over 1 million customers in and around the surrounding cities. And part of that is Joint Base San Antonio. They are, in fact, our #1 customer. So when we think about hardening our assets, we think about first, how do we do that to ensure the connectivity and the resiliency with respect to Joint Base San Antonio? Because quite frankly, if we were to take an attack, or if we've had an electromagnetic pulse event, which we know will come, it's a matter of time, we've got to be ready. And ERCOT is one of the 3 grid operators in the country, and we have the very precious assets of Joint Base San Antonio. So we not only have a strategic alignment with national security, we also have the ability to, should one of the grids go down, we could play a very big role in Black Start as it relates to any of the other grids that are connected to us on the perimeter. We have been working with Department of Homeland Security, Department of Energy, and the Department of Defense on this first of a kind project that will harden Circuit 1, that will enable to, in the event of any strike or any attack from a nation state, we will ensure the viability of those assets in any type of strike or event, up to and include electromagnetic pulse events. We have to do this in a collaborative way. We can't take this all alone on our own hand. As Chantal pointed out, municipals are strained significantly in our ability to be holistic ourselves. So we've got to build these partnerships, these collaborative environments where we can help draw from each other. So that's what we've done here in building the Circuit 1 project. It's a community effort, but beyond this though, we have built other uniqueness with our partners. For example, we have entered into an agreement that we just signed here recently on the development of a regional security operations center. That is a collaborative effort. It's a joint project between us and the city of San Antonio. We are a 50% partner in this endeavor. And so what this is going to be able to allow us to do is ultimately be able to share a security operations center together 24/7, 365, where we can talk about threat actors, where we can talk about the latest threats and the latest defense techniques that we need to deploy. And that we can also take some of these conversations in a top secret environment should those needs come up with local law enforcement, FBI, or the Secret Service. So we have a lot of capability with this. We're excited about this Regional Security Operations Center. It's going to go on Port San Antonio property. It will go live in about 18 months. But this is a joint venture with them, and it's real exciting because it parlays very much what we're doing with Joint Base San Antonio around Circuit 1. So that will actually provide us some ability in the future to be able to control some of our assets from a remote location. Should we have a hurricane, should we have another weather event, or another pandemic that's even worse than the one we have now.
So as Song mentioned, my background is in planetary science. So I have been associated with several spacecraft missions to Mars, and I've been part of the team which has driven the rovers around Mars for more than 15 years. So with that, I'm trying to bring a different futuristic slant to the smart cities discussion. So I need to perhaps give you an introduction of the scenario that we are at. So today, China launched a mission to Mars. Last Sunday, United Arab Emirates launched a mission to Mars. Next Wednesday, NASA is going to launch a mission to Mars. So this is what you see in the media. This is fun, and there's, of course, we see a lot of activity going on in the space sector. What we don't see is in the background, in 2024, NASA is supposed to go back to the moon with humans. What we don't see is Blue Origin's, or Jeff Bezos' company, wants to go back to go to the moon for the first time with humans, and SpaceX wants to go to Mars with a full-scale rocket ship with 400 passengers before 2030. So why is this any different? In 1969, when humans landed on the moon, we were told in 20 years, humans are going to live on another planet, and nothing happened. We essentially, instead of that, we got Twitter and Facebook. So nothing really happened. So why is this any different now? It's different because the kind of people who are involved right now in the space game is suddenly turned very serious. So Jeff Bezos famously said once that he's going to, ambition is to set up people on another planet, and he'll do this until he is successful or he's broke. And as of the, Amazon stock over the last 3 months has taken its value to maybe $200 billion. So there's little chance that Jeff Bezos, who funds his company by selling some stock every year, is going to go broke in the short term. Same with Elon Musk. His ambition is to make humans a multiplanetary species. And he has been actually doing this with a vengeance, and he's doing it differently from the government. The government had no initiative to lower costs, and Elon Musk came into the business and lowered the cost of travel to space by maybe 90%. So the space mission to Mars that he's talking about is going to cost maybe 2% per seat. He's actually trying to make it such that at $200,000 you can buy a round trip ticket to Mars. So both these gentlemen have a record of delivering what they thought. Nobody thought, you would have electric vehicles driving all over the place 20 years back. But today, Tesla is a major company. And so it is about to, if it is not about to, it's probably already disrupted the automotive market. And there's another interesting company also worth mentioning is Richard Branson's company, Virgin Galactic. They went public in October last year. So this is a space tourism company. They're also developing their own right to go to space. So they're on the stock market, their stock has doubled, they have worthy investors. So this game will be different this time. So we are actually at the start of a new space age. So how does this relate to smart city? Think maybe 50 years back, nobody thought you would have a permanent base in Antarctica. Yet when I started my PhD, my office mate was the lead of the US mission to Antarctica. And his big gripe was he didn't like the base station there. It is the McMurdo base station. It looks like it has everything. It has a heated interior, of course, and then it has cafeterias and it has cable TV. So he thought it was too boring. He didn't want to go to McMurdo. He wanted to go and camp out in the ice. So before that, I never knew that 365 days there is a human presence at Antarctica, but humans did it. Similarly, if you think of the space station at a speed of, so it's a very different environment. You're moving at a speed of 27,000 miles an hour around the Earth. You're seeing a sunset and sunrise every half an hour, which screws up humans have this circadian rhythm, which we are governed by. We need to see the sun once in 24 hours. And so you go to the space station, suddenly everything is different. You're seeing a sunset and sunrise every 30 minutes. I'll just make one point, which was very interesting to me about your previous question. And that was about how does COVID change the smart cities?
Please do.
Right. And so one of the things I would like to touch upon is what Igor mentioned, that connectivity is a right. So now non-COVID environment will become a right. And so think of how will air travel reopen? Tens of thousands of people moving from one continent to another, and they will only do it if the place where you're going from and the place you're going to are COVID safe. And there's a huge underlying planning perhaps going on, and I'm sure many, many people are working behind the scene with the airline industry, with the local regulations. For example, if you want to go to Hawaii now, beyond August 1, you need a COVID test 2 days before to board the flight. So how will this work? Will there be quarantine? What will be the environment in the plane? So you're thinking of smart habitats and smart cities being connected, and whether requirement and right will be non-COVID environment. Okay, coming back to your
Interesting comment. Very interesting comment.
So anyway, coming back to your question about loneliness, about experiences in tight spaces and loneliness. So living in space is very difficult. So famously, one of the astronauts once said, and this was when I was young, I think he came back from a 365-day stay in the space station, and he was asked, how do you feel? And, you know, people say these high and lofty things about space. And he said, I feel like a lab rat. Okay. So
Rats.
lab rat. So under observation, right? So people are monitoring it. So the defining thing in space is loneliness, right? I mean, we humans do not understand how much we depend on each other and we depend on information. And although your kids are not talking to you in the dining table and they're watching an iPad, they still need you. That human presence is required. And to do that, there has been certain things that NASA has been trying out. Is one, you have a very intensive exercise regime. Two is this Alexa has brought in a very interesting facet to it. You know, you can talk to Alexa. Your kids probably talk to Alexa. Now, unfortunately, Alexa doesn't know your mood. You know, one day you might be happy and the other day you may not be happy. So NASA in the last International Space Station mission sent out a instrument where they could actually assess the mood and reply accordingly. So you know, if you can have an Alexa-like AI device that can answer your question and say that, well, when you're in a happy mood, it has a different tone. And when you're in a not so happy mood, it has a different tone, much like a human companion would.
I'm an analyst at a think tank based in Washington, so I tend to look at these issues of smart cities in very much a geopolitical competitiveness prism. And when we talk about smart cities, we're really talking about something that is not a choice for Japan. It is something that is necessary for its very survival in the decades to come. And that is not only identified by the government, but also in the private sector. And the private sector lead on this has been Toyota. So why do we want Toyota to be involved in this? There are two reasons. One is domestic. It's because Japan, as well as a lot of industrialized countries, are facing this big pressure about an aging society on the one hand, and a shrinking population, a declining birth rate on the other. So you have to rethink how you're going to live. The other issue for Japan in particular is that its identity as a trading nation, it used to be at the forefront of exporting technology-driven goods out abroad. Now it's into the service sector. What can it export? So looking at this, a company like Toyota is thinking, all right, we are a car company, but people are not driving as much. And people are not as attracted to automobiles as a sense of identity. The younger generation would say, no, I don't need a car. I can Uber, I can Lyft. I like rideshare. The older generation would say, well, a car has been like part of my identity. What I drive defines who I am. So there's this generation gap. So Toyota's looking at this and saying, well, where do we fit in when this younger generation comes and says, I don't need to buy a car? The other issue is, well, if we're not really going to be defining ourselves in the competitiveness sphere by number of cars we're selling, then we have to change what kind of cars we are selling. And this is going to be self-driving cars, cars that are heavily dependent on technology, AI, and all the data sharing information that comes with a self-driving car. Putting these two things together, their own corporate needs about redefining themselves as a car company, and then secondly, looking at Japan and the needs of this country. And Toyota, of course, is one of the biggest companies in Japan. It has taken on this initiative to say, well, we want to build a smart city. We want to build a smart city in the foothills of Mount Fuji. We're going to do this from next year. We're investing a ton of money, except the money is actually not disclosed. It'll be from next year. It will integrate everything that we stand for. That is to say, the car of the future. How do we transport ourselves? We're going to use AI. We're going to use cutting edge technology. But not only that, we're going to talk about building communities. What do communities in the future need? They need greater integration. If you're old, you need to be more integrated with society. You're going to need more healthcare. You're going to have to need more data to ensure that you get the best optimum healthcare possible. We have energy issues. We're going to go for green technology. We're going to go for less vertical greenery, vertical agriculture. These are the things that Toyota has really been banking on. And so this project called the Woven City Project will start construction in 2021. After a few years, they will have a pilot of about 2,000 people, mostly Toyota people, but also a lot of primary research people, scientists living there to see how this integration of technology as well as social needs can come together in a community. So this addresses some of the domestic challenges that Japan will face, and it has the full support of the Japanese national government as well as at the local government level. Well, there is a consensus about common goods. And I think we've seen this, especially in dealing with the health crisis. The common good is about, first and foremost of all, keeping the contagion from spreading, the collective interest in everything from wearing masks to taking measures to stop the spread. There's also this understanding of a common good about the society is only strongest as its weakest link. And we've seen that because in parts, much of East Asia, we haven't seen that kind of income gap. Poor people in America are much more vulnerable to COVID than the rich people. There's also an ethnic thing, but it's much more of a social economic issue. The spending priority in some other countries, in Japan and in Taiwan, even though Taiwan is not technically a country, has been to really take this COVID issue as an opportunity to rethink where the investments should be in education, in decreasing the income divide and the social inequities. And internet access has certainly been one of them, not perhaps as much as in Europe, but it has been part of that national dialogue, which I have not yet heard here in the United States.
Our ambition is really to go carbon negative at some point, but as it stands today, we'll reduce the footprint or the impact of carbon, both on the emission side and the utilization side, somewhere on the order of 75 to 80%. So it's significant. I would tell you that we probably have been able to get more done more quickly. Now, I regret it took a pandemic to do this. Don't get me wrong, but it's been interesting for us. We've been really amazed at how much more quickly we're able to advance the interest of the technology just through thinking about how we connect differently. It's not waiting for weeks and weeks and weeks where everybody can find a way to get on an airplane, to fly to a common location, to sit down and have a meeting. So I will tell you, for us, it's really without exception, it's really accelerated the conversations. Now, Song, to your point, the actual work, that's been a challenge. We have people that are waiting for us, Germany, Belgium, Netherlands specifically. We have some work in China we need to get to, and we that's physical. We have to go on site. You know, the concrete and building is a local business pretty much everywhere. So that's certainly a challenge. But I would say we are able to have conversations and substantive conversations, meaningful conversations in ways we have not been able to have them in the past. And that is moving us forward more quickly, I would say.
So what is happening in Amsterdam? I think if you look at Amsterdam, you have to look at Europe as a whole. And it's interesting to hear about Japan, where you say smart cities is not something that is a choice or nice to have. It's necessary for survival. And I think the same goes for Europe. And Europe, of course, is EU is 27 countries. Still, we lose one every now and then, but we're 27 now. All with their own issues. Some of them have a very aging population, as in Japan. Look in the south of Europe, Italy, for example. But I think if you look at Europe as a whole and the position of Amsterdam in it, I think there's a growing awareness that Europe, as it becomes more and more integrated, will not have 27 big cities that are all sort of equal. In the end, in 20, 30, 40, 50 years' time, what we're going to see is that there are going to be a couple of economic centers in the whole of Europe. People can travel wherever they want, they can live wherever they want, businesses can go wherever they want. So the idea is there will probably be what? Handful of big cities, slightly comparable perhaps to the United States of America, where there are, obviously New York, Los Angeles, and there are a lot of very interesting and good cities where a lot is happening in between. But for Europe, it will be the same. There will be a couple of cities that will stand out, and that will be the center of economic activity. And how do you become that? And I think that's very much on top of the agenda for Amsterdam. How do we make sure that we are part of that handful and not of the 20 other, say, capitals that are nice, but not the center of economic activity? And that's very much, the city needs to be future-proof. And there is a big competition with other European cities to that effect. After the Brexit, you could see that very clearly, that when London sort of moved out, and it will always be a great city, but if you look at a city part of the EU, what's it going to be? Who's going to take London's place? And some cities are very smart in that. For example, Frankfurt has been very efficient in attracting lots of financial institutions. But I think Amsterdam is making it a priority to be one of that handful cities in Amsterdam. And I think that we recognize, or that we see, that economic activity, businesses want to be in a place where talent wants to be. You need talent. So talent wants to live in smart cities, future-proof cities. So I think that has been an enormous driver for Netherlands as a whole, but especially Amsterdam, to make sure that we are part of that. And I think already for a very long time, I mean, anyone who's been to Amsterdam knows that we have more bicycles than we have people living there. I think it's actually a ratio of 2 or 3 to 1. So we're building on our culture and our history there. And when you talk about self-driving cars, it's been on top of the agenda. Actually, we want no cars in city centers. And if there are cars, they must be electrical, self-driving. People don't want to own a car anymore. Our public transport is great. And I think that people more and more, and COVID-19, and I'm sure we'll get to talk about it, has a huge impact on that as well. Young people, talent, the talents that we need to be a future-proof city, they want something different from their cities now. Mobility is one of them, but we want clean environment, we want green around us, we want to have everything that makes us happy. And happiness, I think, is now looked upon very differently than 20 years ago. So what are we working on? We're working on a lot. We're working at no cars, or as little as cars as possible in the city, smart mobility, efficient and smart ways, where the city must be very much greener. We're now transferring loads of parking spaces into parks and into green areas, community areas, just to make it more livable. And we're working hard on smart buildings. Again, I like the concrete topic that you had here. And a couple of the issues that I'm dealing with is what is a smart building? And a smart building, for example, I'm working on the example now, producer of elevators. Lifts, how do you call it in the US? Elevator or lift, I forget. That if you get into the elevator, that there's an automatic sensor measuring the temperature of everyone in there. So if someone comes in and has a fever, there will be, I have no idea what they're going to do, perhaps go back to ground floor and kick you out, or an alarm is going to go off. But it all has to do with healthy living and clean environment, and that our buildings around us, there's so much possible now in making sure that we have a safe and healthy environment. So one of those simple things, one of those relatively simple things, an elevator where you can come in and it can say, well, you seem to have a fever, whatever, go back home or something. That's revolutionary in the way of how you look at buildings and how you look at our working environment. I have no idea what privacy laws are going to say about it, actually, what we're looking at. But as a development, it's interesting.
It is true that we wouldn't have smart cities if we wouldn't be able to connect, and if we wouldn't be able to send and receive data. And we think that it's cables, and it is, of course, cables, but not only. It's spectrum for all the wireless communications, but it's also use of different technologies that connect us through other means than data. Well, drones, to give you an example, right? Then they also provide connectivity. And that, let's say, interaction between humans to machines, machine to machines, creates tons of regulatory problems. And of course, although in the case of smart cities, you would think that they are limited to cities, but as Wandela mentioned, we already have this issue in Europe, and we come across it more and more often across the world, that smart cities are interconnected, and we're really looking at a global network. We're looking at a global infrastructure without any borders. So naturally, we had to figure out a way to start talking to each other. And I remember back in the 90s when the internet protocol was just beginning to work, people were sort of looking around and saying, well, you know, where do we take this? And someone said, oh, let's take it to the ITU, which is the International Telecommunication Union. It deals with telecommunications. It's been around for over 100 years. It's within the United Nations family. And I think they still regret it until the very, very day today. But during one of the ITU summits, they said, no, IP protocol, no, that's not us. No, we deal with the real world. We deal with telecoms. We don't want some academic stuff. And so for the very long time, there was actually no place for us to talk about the different issues that come up with internet and internet governance until in 2005, finally, the General Assembly of the United Nations said, okay, guys, we are the global panel. We need to figure out what we're doing. And they came up with a really interesting solution. And they said, we'll take two paths. One path is the path we usually take, which is the intragovernmental path. But why don't we do a little experiment here on the side, and let's create the Internet Governance Forum, which would be a place of different stakeholders. And the basis is that we have not only the government, but we have business, we have academia, we have the tech community, and we have non-governmental organizations. And all of these five stakeholders meet every year on equal footing with one voice each. Because the idea is that no one really knows best how to deal with the internet. The tech community would feel they know best, but so would the government, and of course, so would business. NGOs would also say they have a pretty good understanding of what the internet is about. So the IGF is a really unique UN body, which is a global body that where all the stakeholders come together and act and talk about the issues that we currently see. We're used to now treating internet as a utility. So you would imagine that it's sort of something one expects just as much as gas, electricity, or a phone line. But I think that we're going now beyond that, and there are several countries in Europe which are actually introducing this as a not only as a basic human right, but actually a constitutional right. There are certain countries in Europe that are now guaranteeing by constitution, in their constitution, that high-speed broadband internet connection is available within 2 kilometers, so 1.6 miles radius from any household in that given country.
We would, as I mentioned, we would completely need to reimagine in the post-COVID world. We need to provide COVID-free smart areas. And this will be not just an optional requirement, but absolutely critical to move the global economy to where it was before.